She was falling asleep during every mission briefing. While her squad studied maps, memorized call signs, and prepared equipment for deployment, Staff Sergeant Lauren Parker leaned back in her chair, eyes drifting shut as if the fate of hostages overseas was no more important than a dull lecture. Her unit despised her for it. Officers marked her as unreliable. Whispers followed her everywhere, lazy, broken, dangerous to those beside her. But Lauren wasn't careless. She was contained. For weeks, she sat in silence while others mocked her, never rising to defend herself, never explaining why exhaustion clung to her like a shadow. Then, on a morning heavy with fluorescent haze and stale coffee, a Pentagon general entered the room. He didn't ask questions. He didn't demand explanations. He simply whispered 2 words. And in that instant, everything changed. Before we continue, if you believe our military heroes deserve better than being written off as failures, type respect below. And tell me where you're watching from. This story hits different when I know who's standing with Lauren. I read every comment. The first days at the training facility told everyone exactly who Lauren Parker was, or at least who they thought she was. Her boots hit cracked asphalt at 5:30 every morning, moving with deliberate calm. She never rushed, never showed urgency, and that infuriated the people around her. To her squadmates, discipline looked like laziness. To instructors, composure looked like disinterest. At the rifle range, 30 soldiers fired with determination, emptying magazines into paper silhouettes. Lauren stood in position, weapon raised with perfect form, breathing steady, then lowered it without firing a single round. When the ceasefire whistle blew, her target looked untouched, pristine as if it had been ignored for years. Whispers spread instantly. Does she even know how to shoot? While the range sergeant carved angry notes across his clipboard, the obstacle course turned whispers into open hostility. Soldiers hurled themselves over walls, crawled through sand, and sprinted past obstacles with sweat-soaked desperation. Lauren reached the 8-foot wall, studied it in silence, then sat cross-legged at its base and closed her eyes. Her squad stared in disbelief as seconds bled into minutes. Bryce, the self-appointed leader, barked across the barrier, "Move your ass, Parker!" She didn't flinch. She didn't respond. 15 minutes later, when her squad returned drenched and gasping, she simply stood, dusted off her pants, and jogged back into formation as though nothing had happened. By evening chow, the names had already stuck. Sleepwalker. Nap time. Bryce and his crew sharpened them into weapons. "Planning another nap tomorrow?" he sneered across the mess hall. Owen snickered into his tray. Larson smirked, adding, "Maybe she needs an alarm clock loud enough to wake the dead weight." Mendes muttered darkly, "She's going to get someone killed." Lauren ate alone, eyes scanning the hall with mechanical precision, never acknowledging the jeers. Her fork rested at the same angle on her tray every night, movements efficient, posture steady, gaze always cataloging exits and blind spots. To them, it looked robotic, almost detached. To the one man watching carefully, the Master Chief, it looked like training. Still, the punishments mounted. The urban combat drill collapsed into chaos when role players ambushed the squad. Bryce went down with a paint round to the chest. Owen was tagged seconds later. Mendes fought hard but was overwhelmed. Lauren? She sat in a corner, eyes closed, breathing like she was meditating. By the time the alarm signaled failure, 3/4 of her squad lay painted and humiliated. Bryce stormed toward her, face crimson, spitting words like bullets. "You didn't fire a single round. You just sat there while we got slaughtered." Lauren stood calmly, brushing sawdust from her uniform. "Rear security was maintained," she said, voice flat, almost clinical. Bryce laughed without humor. "We're all dead, Sergeant." "Rear security in what world?" The instructor cut in, jaw tight. "Ward—" He caught himself, checked his notes. "Parker, one more performance like this, and you're gone. This is your official warning." Her response was the same as always. "Yes, Sergeant." No anger, no fear, just silence and stillness. But behind her eyes, something flickered, a light restrained, waiting. The squad's contempt grew into a daily ritual. Every insult, every nickname, every sideways glance piled on. And through it all, Lauren absorbed the humiliation in silence, posture unbroken, bearing steady. What no one understood was that every dismissal, every mockery, every hostile stare was pulling them closer to the moment when silence would shatter. Late one evening, while most of the barracks had quieted into restless snores, Lauren Parker sat alone on her bunk in the far corner. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting sterile white across steel lockers and scuffed tile floors. Around her, soldiers tossed in sleep, their exhaustion unguarded. Lauren, however, did not sleep. She never truly did. From the pocket of her duffel bag, she withdrew a small case wrapped in olive drab cloth. It wasn't regulation issue, and she never displayed it publicly. When she unwrapped it, the object inside caught the light in muted silver tones. It was a ring, simple, battered, with etchings half worn from years of friction. To the untrained eye, it was nothing special. To Lauren, it was sacred. She turned it slowly between her fingers, eyes reflecting something deeper than exhaustion. The ring wasn't jewelry. It was identification, forged in a world most of her peers couldn't imagine. Every groove marked years of missions carried out in silence, in places no one admitted existed. It was a reminder of loyalty, sacrifice, and survival. The weight against her skin grounded her when whispers threatened to drown her identity. If anyone noticed, they never asked. But Master Chief Hayes had sharp eyes. He saw how she touched her pocket before every formation. He noticed the way her hand brushed the cloth whenever her squad jeered. He didn't know exactly what it was, but he knew enough to recognize reverence. He'd seen veterans keep dog tags, folded flags, or faded photographs with the same careful devotion. Objects like that weren't trinkets, they were anchors. The squad, of course, mocked what they didn't understand. One night, Bryce swaggered past her bunk, spotting the cloth just before she tucked it away. "What's that, Parker? A lucky charm? Maybe it'll help you stay awake tomorrow." Owen laughed. Larson snorted. Mendes muttered something about dead weight rituals. Lauren said nothing. She folded the cloth with deliberate care, slid the ring back inside, and stowed it deep in her bag. What they couldn't see was that the ring wasn't about luck. It was about memory. Lauren had received it after her last operation before her injury, a covert mission that never made the news. Her team had walked into the kind of place soldiers only whispered about and walked out carrying lives no one would ever thank them for. The ring was given to each member as a bond, silent proof of what they endured together. She wore it only in moments of solitude, a reminder of comrades who would never mock her, never doubt her discipline. Every time the jeers grew sharper, every time her instructor's warnings weighed heavier, Lauren's fingers found that small object. It steadied her heartbeat, sharpened her mind. She could wait. She had waited before. Patience was survival, and survival was the first rule of every mission she had ever completed. But to the others, her silence remained infuriating. To them, the ring was invisible, and so was her history. All they saw was a woman failing in plain sight. All they remembered was her eyes drifting shut when orders were shouted, her deliberate stillness when action was demanded. Still, the object remained, hidden, cherished, battle-worn, a piece of another life, waiting for the moment when its true meaning would surface. And the day was coming fast when that silver circle, invisible to almost everyone, would align with a voice of authority. And when it did, the soldier they thought was broken would reveal exactly what she had been all along. Long before she ever set foot on the cracked asphalt of the training compound, Lauren Parker had earned her place among warriors. Her file, though redacted and sealed from most eyes, told fragments of the truth. Multiple deployments, high-value extractions, 0 failed missions. But even that sterile language failed to capture the reality of where she had been and what she had survived. Her story began in dusty valleys overseas, where night fell without warning and silence carried more danger than gunfire. Lauren had been barely 22 when she first learned the difference between training drills and real combat. In the training manuals, movement was about angles, arcs, and textbook precision. In the field, movement was about survival, about reading shadows, predicting ambushes, hearing a change in the wind before a shot was fired. Her first deployment burned lessons into her memory that never faded. She could still feel the sting of sand against her cheek as she crawled through dirt, keeping her profile low while tracer rounds tore overhead. She remembered the way her squad leader's voice stayed calm in the headset, telling them to breathe, telling them to move slow even when adrenaline begged for speed. That calm became her compass. Years later, she became that calm for others. Her reputation grew not from medals pinned to her chest, but from whispered respect in the barracks. Parker doesn't miss. Parker doesn't panic. If you're cornered, you want her on your six. It wasn't bravado. It was survival refined into muscle memory. But then came the mission that changed everything. A raid deep in hostile territory, intelligence so sensitive that even the planners doubted their maps. Her team moved through pitch-black alleys, her senses alive to every echo. She remembered the sudden eruption of fire from 3 directions, the way walls splintered, the way screams cut off mid-sentence. She also remembered the explosion, the one that tore through their exit route, shattering concrete and sending steel fragments slicing through the air. One piece of shrapnel tore into her side, driving her to her knees. Pain blurred her vision, but discipline kept her moving. She laid down suppressive fire with steady hands while her teammates dragged the wounded out. Later, she would wake in a field hospital, her uniform shredded, her side stitched, her career uncertain. The months that followed were a different kind of battle. Recovery demanded patience she didn't want to give. Every scar ached with reminders of what she had lost, not just blood, but momentum, confidence, the illusion of invincibility. Command rotated her stateside, citing medical reassessment. She learned to live with silence instead of chaos, with fluorescent hospital lights instead of desert moons. When clearance finally came, it wasn't to rejoin her old unit. She was reassigned, shuffled into conventional training rotations. To others, it looked like demotion. To her, it felt like exile. She carried skills forged in combat zones, yet now she was surrounded by soldiers who judged her for closing her eyes, who mocked her discipline as laziness. But Lauren knew the truth. She was conditioned differently. She had been part of something specialized. Recall protocols designed to keep operatives dormant until activation. It was a safeguard, not a flaw. Without the proper command, her abilities stayed locked behind layers of discipline and code. To the untrained eye, that looked like incompetence. And so she endured their insults, knowing that silence was survival, that patience was her weapon. For all their noise, for all their mockery, they didn't know what she carried. They didn't know that beneath her calm exterior lay years of battle, scars both visible and hidden, and the memory of comrades whose lives had depended on her steady aim. The breaking point arrived during the final evaluation exercise. The air around the training compound was already heavy, buzzing with tension that every soldier could feel. For 2 weeks, Lauren Parker had been the subject of ridicule. Mocked in chow lines, whispered about in barracks, dismissed by instructors who wrote her off as a failure waiting for discharge. But that morning, something different loomed. The scenario was simple on paper: multi-building assault, unknown number of role players acting as hostiles, civilian actors scattered as hostages. Instructors measured speed, accuracy, and casualty prevention. To Lauren's squad, it was just another chance to prove themselves. To Lauren, it was one final opportunity, and perhaps her last chance to stay in uniform. Bryce sneered as helmets were buckled. "Try not to nap this time, Parker." Owen smirked. Larson muttered something cruel about dead weight. Even Mendes shook his head. The squad's contempt had calcified into certainty. Lauren would fail, and they would be dragged down with her. The whistle blew. Soldiers surged through the breach, boots pounding against plywood floors, weapons raised. Paint-tipped rounds cracked in the stale air. Alarms buzzed as casualties mounted. Bryce went down first, tagged in the chest. Owen followed seconds later. Mendes fought like a cornered animal, but the role player's ambush overwhelmed him. And Lauren? She slid into her familiar corner, back against the wall, eyes closing once more. To everyone watching through the observation windows, it looked like confirmation, proof that she didn't belong. The instructors scribbled furiously on clipboards, disappointment bleeding into anger. Master Chief Hayes exhaled sharply, convinced this was the end. Then the black SUV rolled through the gate. Its tinted windows reflected the harsh training yard lights, engine purring with authority. When the passenger door opened, silence rippled through the compound. Out stepped a Pentagon general, weathered face lined by years of service, movements efficient, deliberate. He scanned the building, then raised his voice. "Parker!" The single word cut through plywood walls, alarms, and the chaos of simulated combat. Inside, Lauren's eyes opened. "Recall mode. Execute." The transformation was instantaneous. She rose in one fluid motion, rifle snapping to her shoulder, body language shifting from passive to predatory. Every ounce of lethargy vanished, replaced by razor-sharp focus. She flowed out of the corner like a current unleashed, weapon tracking to threats before they appeared. The first role player didn't stand a chance. Controlled pair, center mass. Target down. She pivoted before his body hit the ground, anticipating the angle of the next ambush. Two more dropped in rapid succession. Her squad, sprawled in paint-marked defeat, could only stare. In the observation post, pens stopped moving. Stopwatches hung forgotten. Instructors leaned forward, mouths slightly open. They weren't witnessing a good performance. They were witnessing mastery. Lauren cleared the first floor in 90 seconds, every step precise, every movement efficient. On the second floor, she dismantled an ambush designed to overwhelm entire squads, engaging from 3 angles at once. Her rifle barked with controlled precision, every shot placed with surgical intent. Finally, she reached the hostage room, the scenario that had broken class after class. She scanned the geometry in a heartbeat, calculated angles, and moved. 2 role players went down before anyone else understood what happened. The hostage was secured in under 5 seconds. When the long, clean alarm sounded, mission accomplished. Lauren lowered her rifle with calm finality. Her breathing was steady. Her mask of composure slid back into place as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. For 2 weeks, they had mocked her. For 2 weeks, they had laughed. Now, silence consumed the barracks, the training yard, and the minds of every witness. They hadn't been looking at a failure. They had been looking at a professional contained by design, and now they knew. The staging area after the exercise felt heavier than combat itself. Helmets were removed in silence, paint streaks marking defeat on every face except one. Bryce's eyes, once filled with arrogance, now held something closer to fear. He muttered, "What the hell was that, Parker? Who even are you?" Lauren checked her weapon, cleared it with practiced precision, and finally met his gaze. "Same person I've always been," she said quietly. "You just didn't have clearance to see it." The debrief room reeked of gun oil and disinfectant. Lauren sat across from the General and Master Chief Hayes, her rifle disassembled on the table. The General's tone was measured. Recall protocol worked exactly as designed. Parker isn't incompetent. She's conditioned. Without authorization, she appears dormant. With it, she's what you just witnessed. Hayes leaned back, arms crossed, absorbing the implications. And she was buried in my training rotation like a failed recruit, Lauren explained with calm detachment. She'd been injured by shrapnel on her last mission. Medical recovery forced reassignment. Command wanted to test if the conditioning remained intact, so she waited, suppressed, contained, until activation came. The ring in her pocket was no charm. It was a reminder of the comrades who had trusted her silence, who had lived because of her patience. The paperwork moved quickly. Dismissal recommendation deleted. Transfer orders drafted. Within hours, Lauren Parker was reassigned, not as a struggling trainee, but as an instructor for advanced special operations. Her skills, once doubted, would now shape the next generation. But her squad had to live with what they had seen. That night in the barracks, tension hung heavy. Bryce approached with his helmet in his hands, voice unsteady. "Look, we didn't know." Lauren zipped her duffel bag, meeting his words with steady silence. He pressed again. "Why didn't you just show us earlier? Save yourself all the grief?" Her reply was devastating in its simplicity. "Because I wasn't authorized to." Mendes and Larson avoided her eyes, speaking only when military courtesy demanded it. Owen stumbled through an apology outside the mess hall. "I shouldn't have called you dead weight. I didn't understand." Lauren's answer carried no anger, only truth. Most people don't. That's the point. The next morning, the black SUV rolled out through the gates, carrying the general back into shadows where operations never made the news. Hayes watched it disappear, his respect for Lauren carved into silence. She had endured humiliation with composure, carried the weight of secrets without breaking, and revealed her true nature only when called. Graduation day came without ceremony for her. She stood in formation like any other soldier, receiving her orders with quiet professionalism. But everyone present carried the memory of what they had seen, that the sleepwalker had been a predator in waiting, a quiet professional trained to awaken only when permission was given. Some secrets never reach headlines. Some warriors never wear their honors in public, but those who witnessed Lauren's awakening would never forget. They had mocked her, they had doubted her, and they had learned the most dangerous lesson of all. Never underestimate the quiet ones. To everyone who typed respect and shared where you're watching from, thank you for standing with our heroes. Subscribe for more stories like this. See you in the next one.